From the Grand Plains strategy to intense island diplomacy, this chapter was a masterclass in tension, witnessing the chieftain's ambitious city plan unfold under Modun's paranoid gaze, contrasted with Xuetu's nerve-wracking burn the chariots bluff on Bamboo Island. Absolutely gripping. Xuetu manipulating the Shin elders for that salt deal perfectly showcases the Han's calculated ruthlessness, always aiming for stability through strength and shrewd trade. What really resonates is the sheer depth of their long-term planning. Not just grand infrastructure like the causeway, but even down to ecological details like favoring sheep over goats to preserve the grasslands. It's fascinating foresight. The arrival of Ling Feng and the 1,000 Sheep tribe adds yet another layer of complexity to managing the steppe. But with Modun suddenly vanished just as vital Han supplies are en route, the strategic chessboard feels incredibly precarious. Multiple conflicts seem poised to ignite simultaneously. That kid Modun really has his calculations clicking away. Quite the pretty picture he's painted for himself. The Han tribe's thousands of iron-clad infantry are crack troops when it comes to holding fortifications, but take the initiative against steppe cavalry. They can't even catch them. What the hell kind of fight would that be? If they really charged out, only to be led around like dogs on a leash by the enemy cavalry, run ragged until they collapsed, it'd be anyone's guess who'd end up beating whom. So taking the initiative for a head-on clash. That road is completely blocked. Still, there's always another way. Your iron-clad infantry can't catch the wind-swift cavalry, but that doesn't mean you're helpless against them. So I can't catch your men? Doesn't mean I can't pay your home turf a little friendly visit, does it? Tell me, does that scare you? Modun's cavalry are like phantoms, elusive and hard to catch. Even if you know where they are, 2 legs can't outrun 4. But their spring and summer pastures, those are fixed locations they return to year after year. That gives you an opportunity to strike directly at their core. You Zhi's Jinwu Guard are no slouches. They have long since scouted out several of Modun's key pasture locations. After all, You Zhi used to run business routes on the steppe with his father, Yu Fu. Back then, before they had their falling out with Modun, they'd crossed paths several times, often using the same resting spots. Han tribe caravans had even pitched tents on Modun's territory back in the day, so finding the routes would be easy. Besides, steppe nomads generally follow the same migration pattern, chasing water and grass towards the lakes in spring and summer, and heading into the western mountains to escape the cold in winter. The fodder in those mountain valleys is crucial for their survival over winter. Modun's tribe is no different. They predictably make their lives near the large lake. With this intelligence as a foundation, using sailboats to ferry soldiers secretly, and hitting his lakeside home base with a surprise attack, call it justice from above, would be almost ridiculously easy. Now there's just one small problem. While you're raiding his home, he's also got his eye on your stuff. Raiding Modun's main camp is definitely the plan, but Modun isn't sitting idle either. He's currently got his greedy eyes on the Han tribes, stockpiled mountains of cattle and horses, and that gleaming white salt. This precious hoard is currently guarded by a caravan of fewer than 200 people. If they bump into Modun's main force, they're guaranteed goners, just serving themselves up on a platter. If you just focus on raiding his home and ignore whether your own caravan lives or dies, then this trade-off would clearly be a massive loss. So, the caravan needs to be defended, and the base camp needs guarding too. Think about it. If Modun fails to capture the caravan and then discovers you've wiped out his home base, what's the most likely thing he'll do in his rage and desperation? He'll undoubtedly charge straight for your main camp, which will be short on troops. But since you've anticipated this, you naturally won't give him that chance. No, scratch that. You need to give Modun a little surprise beforehand. Otherwise, you'd be too reactive. With the tactic decided, you immediately set about preparing. The soldiers are ready, but the equipment and armor are still somewhat lacking. Nothing for it but to make do for now. The entire Han tribe base on the steppe was mobilized. You have over 4,000 men in 2 garrisons, but you can't possibly take everyone to raid Modun's camp. This isn't a parade, Too many men would just get in the way. Therefore, you dispatched only one unit, the Tiger Guard, under the command of Xuetu, to carry out this special home raiding mission. Earlier in the spring, both units had gotten practice raiding barbarian tribes, and both involved amphibious landings, so they were familiar with the drill. So you simply laid out the strategic objective and left the specific tactics for Xuetu to work out. The bottom line was simple. Hit them as hard as possible. Inflict the greatest losses you can. What possessions do nomads typically have? Nothing much beyond cattle, sheep, other livestock, and felt yurts. Your orders were simple and brutal. Burn every yurt you see. Capture all the living as slaves. Anyone who dares to resist, man, woman, old or young, kill without mercy. As for livestock, lead away what you can, slaughter what you can't on the spot, and dump the carcasses in the lake. Even if the Han tribe gets no use out of it, the enemy must not be left with so much as a single strand of wool. Dare to bare your teeth at the Han tribe, then don't blame me for playing dirty. If I don't beat you until you're kneeling and calling me daddy, then I'm worthless. Thinking of robbing the Han tribe? Then you'd better be ready to be robbed back until you don't even have underwear left. Meanwhile, you gathered all the nomads who had recently joined the tribe, ordering them to muster all males aged 15 and older to form a temporary mobile cavalry unit, tasked with protecting the caravan's flanks. When these nomads, who had only recently thrown in their lot with the Han tribe, heard they were expected to fight, their hearts began to pound. Their enthusiasm was noticeably lacking. They were already somewhat intimidated by Modun. After all, he was the local tyrant of the steppe, commanding several hundred leather-armored cavalry, a fearsome prospect just to hear about. These small tribes were used to surviving precariously between larger powers. How could they dare challenge a major player like Modun? Furthermore, there was a disparity in numbers. From their total population of less than 6,000 nomads, mustering all males 15 and older yielded only about 1,200 men. Although every one of them was skilled, having grown up in the saddle, riding and archery needed no teaching. It was second nature to them, but comparing equipment was disheartening. Modun's main force at least had some bronze weapons and stirrups. What did they have? Only crude homemade bows, with arrowheads improvised from wolf or dog teeth. Outnumbered, poorly equipped, and with low morale. How the hell could they fight this battle? There was no way around it. You had to step in personally to do some persuasion work on these new followers. You first called Ling Feng and Wu Yun over to translate, then summoned the minor nomad chieftains before you and began to speak. I know you've all just settled in, and I know you're afraid of Modun. But this battle must be fought. Why? Because Modun wants to steal our salt. As Ling Feng and Wu Yun translated these words, the expressions in the eyes of the several minor chieftains changed instantly. They might not care much about other things, but this gleaming white salt was their lifeline. The steppe doesn't produce salt. Previously, they relied on the Shin tribe, and later, the Han tribe. Now that the Shin tribe was basically finished, the Han tribe was the only source left. Everyone understood this, and it was one of the main reasons they had pledged allegiance to the Han tribe. Although their primary goal was security, having access to salt by following the Han tribe was a very tangible benefit. Now, hearing that Modun intended to steal the salt, how could they not be alarmed? Sensing the moment was ripe, you raised the stakes. You guessed right. What he wants to steal is our salt supply for the rest of this year and all of next year. If he takes it, the entire steppe will face a salt famine. But right now, the warriors guarding that salt number fewer than 200. So tell me, what should we do? You simply put the ball in their court, letting them choose. Send troops or not. If not, nobody gets salt. If they do, men will certainly die. For a moment, the minor chieftains frowned deeply, clearly not having anticipated such a difficult situation. Just then, Yi Li, standing nearby, suddenly spoke up. Chief, there are so many warriors in the camp and their equipment is excellent. Why not send them? Why insist that we go? You were prepared for this question and answered bluntly. The soldiers I brought from my tribe are all infantry. They can't ride, and the tribe doesn't have enough horses for them anyway. You paused, then added, "Besides, it's not that they aren't fighting. I have to take half of them by boat to raid Modun's main camp. The other half must defend our base, guarding against a desperate counterattack if Modun gets cornered. So, right now, the only ones who can possibly reach the caravan quickly enough to help are you." Yi Li frowned again but said no more. He might have wanted to ask why they couldn't defend the base while the Han infantry protected the caravan, but the thought that the infantry couldn't ride stopped the question from leaving his lips. Seeing that still no one was responding, you decided stronger measures were needed. Time to bring out the big guns. "I know," you said, sweeping your gaze over them. "You're afraid of Modun's main force, those 300 or 400 cavalrymen in leather armor, with stirrups and bronze arrowheads, right?" Then you dangled the bait. "But if you are willing to fight, I will give every one of you a suit of iron armor and iron arrowheads. As for bows, sabers, and spears, I don't have those on hand right now. They'd have to be shipped from the main tribe, and there isn't time for that." As soon as you said this, everyone froze, looking thunderstruck. You beckoned Xuetu over from nearby and had him stand beside you. "See this? Iron armor. You recognize it, right? Same stuff your cooking pots are made of. Much tougher than that flimsy leather armor. Doesn't matter what Modun throws at you, wear this, and you're impervious to blades and spears." As you spoke, you drew the longsword at your waist and struck Xuetu's armored stomach twice with a loud clang. Clang! The sound of metal striking metal echoed, yet the sharp steel sword hadn't left the slightest mark on the iron plate. The eyes of the minor chieftains nearly popped out of their heads. Of course, you were pulling a fast one. At such close range, a powerful thrust with the sword's point would likely have pierced the armor, but you had deliberately used chopping blows. It would have been amazing if that had broken through. Still, against Modun's bronze arrowheads, the Han tribe's iron armor was more than sufficient. "This, for us, everyone gets one?" Yi Li asked, pointing to himself, his face filled with disbelief. Xuetu, who had just taken the 2 blows, looked equally dumbfounded. He leaned in and whispered, "Chief, are you really giving them iron armor?" You answered decisively, "They are also people of the Han tribe." Then you nodded firmly to Yi Li. "Everyone gets one. For now, you're just borrowing them. Return them after the battle. But don't worry, in a while I'll have a batch of new armor custom-made specifically for cavalry. For now, though, we'll have to borrow some by stripping it off others for you to wear. That should set your minds at ease, right?" As soon as you finished speaking, Yi Li and Xuetu were once again dumbstruck. "Chief, we have to ride out immediately." "2. If you strip our armor off to give to them, what will we wear?" Xuetu was the first to jump up in protest. Yi Li, however, stared intently at you, wondering if you were just making empty promises, trying to trick them into marching to their deaths. "What are you getting worked up about?" You shot Xuetu a glare. "Who said anything about stripping your armor? I was talking about the 1,000 ox guard. Those archers and crossbowmen. They aren't riding out. They'll be staying in camp, manning the fortifications and shooting from a distance. Heavy armor isn't crucial for them. It's the perfect opportunity to take their armor and give it to the cavalry first. The numbers roughly match up too. If it's really not enough, we can supplement. With some leather armor from the logistics troops, we can scrape together over 1,000 sets. That'll be plenty." You retorted to Xuetu while explaining to Yi Li, your tone leaving no room for doubt, squeezing into the Han tribe's standard-issue military uniforms for the first time. These nomads felt awkward all over, as if wearing borrowed clothes. Still, clothes make the man, as they say. Dressed in uniform gear, they finally looked somewhat like soldiers, at least much more orderly. Bare feet wouldn't do. With a wave of your hand, you produced a pile of linen cloth intended for export. Tore it rip into squares and gave it to them to use as foot wraps. This stuff was perfect for stuffing into boots. Supposedly, even Russian soldiers in Xuetu still use them. Don't get the wrong idea. This wasn't that twisted practice of foot binding, just a square piece of cloth. You place your foot in the Middle, wrap the front, sides, and back. Then shove your foot straight into the boot. All set. The boots were also spares originally meant for archers. They shuffled sizes around until everyone had a pair that more or less fit. The final step, armoring up. The veteran archers helped them, guiding them hand by hand. Fortunately, the Han tribe's armor was adjustable and didn't require a specific body type, though taller guys might have a bit more skin showing. The iron helmets were also adjustable, though unfortunately they didn't come with face guards. Now freshly outfitted, the young nomad men finally regained some confidence. Encased in these seemingly impenetrable iron shells, they felt much more secure. If they still managed to get shot and killed, they could only blame their own bad luck. Looking at this group of uniformly dressed but formationally chaotic temporary cavalry, resembling a flock of ducks being herded, you didn't find much to criticize. No matter how green, they were still over 1,000 men, and 1,000 men clad in iron armor. Next came organizing them. The structure was already in place. They just followed the previous system of squads, tens, companies, and battalions, finding their respective units and sticking close to their leaders. Then there were the iron arrowheads you promised. The Han tribe's main forces used crossbows, which fired bolts, short, sturdy projectiles with small, cone-like tips that had little edge and only 2 fletchings on the tail. They were quite different from bow arrows. Arrows were much longer, had various head designs often wider than the shaft for maximum lethality, and sometimes even featured barbs. Han arrows had 3 fletchings for stabler flight. Normally, the military camp wasn't equipped with bows and arrows, but considering this was a front-line position with a high risk of conflict, and following the principle of being prepared, a batch had recently been brought in along with a supply shipment. The quantity wasn't huge, but it was more than enough to arm these 1,200 men. Each man received 50 gleaming iron-tipped arrows. However, you weren't that generous. This batch of iron arrowheads was your meticulously designed single-use product, cast directly from molten iron smelted with undesulfurized coal. They had a high sulfur content and were extremely brittle. If shot against rock, the arrowhead would shatter with a snap. Hitting bone produced the same effect, leaving fragments embedded in the flesh. If one was lucky enough to only pierce flesh, the arrowhead might remain intact. But even if the enemy picked them up, hoping to use them against your iron armor, dream on. They would just shatter with a ding upon impact. Trying to use the Han tribe's arrows against the Han tribe? Not a chance. This was called a technology barrier. You could pick up my enemy's weapons and use them, but picking up mine was useless. Frustrating, isn't it? It was the same principle as the iron pots you sold to the steppe peoples. High sulfur iron that shattered easily if struck. The Han tribe's own pots were made of desulfurized wrought iron that would dent but not break even if flattened. You thought the Han tribe were simply altruistic heroes, casually exporting ironware? Too naive. Clearly, these newly acquired followers didn't understand the intricacies involved. They handled the finely crafted iron arrowheads lovingly, treasuring them as precious items, utterly reluctant to actually shoot them. After all, an arrow shot was likely an arrow lost, like throwing meat buns at a dog, a complete waste. Using meant having one less, a real shame. All right, you've all got your gear. Rations are large flatbreads made from flour, enough for a few days. You know more about horse fodder than I do, so manage that yourselves. You clapped your hands and began assigning the task. These provisions are enough to get you to the caravan. Any food and drink needed after that can be reimbursed by the caravan. Let me repeat the mission. Rendezvous with the caravan, protect the cattle, horses, and salt, and return as quickly as possible. If you encounter the enemy en route, evade if you can, run if you must. Don't get bogged down in a fight. If losses become too heavy, the people are more important than the goods. Just bring the caravan personnel back safely. If the goods are lost, we'll figure something else out. Yes, sir. We will definitely bring back both the caravan and the goods, Yili responded loudly. He sounded enthusiastic, but inwardly he was probably ecstatic. Your final sentence, prioritize. Saving the people. The goods can be abandoned, had clearly struck a chord. See? I'm not sending them to die as cannon fodder. Human lives are worth more than those cattle, horses, and salt. That should buy some loyalty. The Han tribe's 2 garrisons did have cavalry, though not many, about 300 men in total, with over 1,000 horses, fully equipped. The Tiger Guard, traveling by water, didn't need horses, and the 1,000 Ox Guard, defending the base, didn't need them either. Perfect. They were idle anyway. With a grand gesture, you incorporated these 300 regular cavalrymen into the Nomad unit to operate together. You also assigned Wu Yun from the caravan to act as their guide. All set. After the cavalry unit departed, you had Ling Feng inform the Nomad women and children remaining behind. Don't graze the animals too far away for the next few days. If they encountered enemies, they should immediately retreat to the military camp, where soldiers would protect them. The Nomad women readily agreed, though whether they could actually make it back in time if trouble arose, heaven only knew. With this relief force sent off, dispatching the Tiger Guard became much simpler. Their equipment and personnel were ready. They just needed to pick up their gear and go. Xuetu slapped his chest, brimming with confidence. Rest easy, Chief. Once the boats are in place, the enemy is toast. We're experienced at fighting from tea. Boats, you shook your head, pouring cold water on his enthusiasm. Don't get cocky. This time is different from the last. Last time, we landed stealthily. This time, you might have to make a contested landing under a hail of arrows. Last time, the enemy were amateurs. This time, they're regular troops, and they have horses. Stay sharp. Be prepared to handle all sorts of unexpected problems. You specifically reminded him to make good use of the sword and shield soldiers. The enemy's ranged firepower isn't weak. Make those shields count. Yes, sir. Please rest assured. Chief, I know what to do. Knocked down a peg by your comparison. Xuetu finally dropped his casual attitude and became serious. The Tiger Guard's fleet departed the same day as the cavalry. You went personally to see them off. Watching these troops, you had trained yourself. You felt a solid sense of confidence. Although the Jinwu Guard hadn't yet pinpointed Modun's main force's exact location, they could confirm that the bulk of his army had long since gone out raiding. His home base was currently just an empty shell, garrisoned only by the old, weak women and children, sending Xuetu with 2,000 elite troops to pay them a visit, even if they couldn't flatten the place in one go, retreating safely. Shouldn't be a problem. 2 of Modun's scouts, like gophers on the steppe, were furtively popping their heads up near the trade route the Han tribe often used. They hadn't held out much hope, thinking those crafty devils of the Han tribe had probably long known someone planned to rob them and might have taken a detour to slip away. But to their utter surprise, You Zhi's caravan appeared right before, their eyes swaggering along as if they'd lost their minds, completely oblivious to the danger. This absolutely thrilled the 2 scouts. After lying low in this godforsaken place for days, they had finally spotted their fat sheep. Seeing the 100-odd men followed by a long train of carts, looking like a delivery straight to their doorstep, the scouts' eyes gleamed with greed. They quickly pulled out their ox-horn bugles and blew, hoo-oo, hoo-oo, signaling their chieftain nearby. Target acquired. Come and collect. At that moment, Modun was lounging in his tent, tearing into a leg of mutton. He suddenly froze. Did he hear a horn? He cocked an ear, straining to listen, but before he could be sure, the tent flap was thrown open with a swish. Chief, the brothers, on the perimeter blew the horn. They must have spotted the caravan. Should we give chase now? Asked a muscular man, bare-chested except for felt shorts, his hair in 2 small braids, clearly in a great hurry. They're here? Ha 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 ha! Modun slammed the silver bowl of mare's milk in his hand onto the ground with a clang, hastily wiped his greasy mouth, and roared, Go! Sound the horns! Gather everyone! They've finally fucking shown up. Tell the brothers, capture this load of white salt, and everyone gets a reward. Any livestock we seize, we split evenly. He charged out as he roared his orders. Yes, sir. The messenger dashed off promptly. Simultaneously, Tribesmen grazing their herds scattered about heard the call to assemble. Shouting, they spurred their horses, galloping furiously toward the rallying point. In no time, a temporary cavalry division, a dark mass of several thousand young warriors, had gathered. Most had 3 horses apiece, though numbering fewer than 4,000 men. They commanded over 10,000 horses. The thunder of 10,000 hooves was deafening, their menacing approach breathtakingly intimidating. Thump, thump, thump. The deafening thunder of hooves surged closer from behind. Every man in the caravan felt his heart clench in an invisible fist. Though they had braced themselves, knowing a fight was likely, the actual sound of the pursuit still made their legs feel weak. Heavy cavalry, provide cover. Carts, speed up, don't let them surround us. The moment You Zhi heard the horn, he knew the main event had begun, but he remained cool as a cucumber, not panicking in the slightest, issuing commands methodically. Taking advantage of the fact that Modun's main force hadn't fully caught up yet, he had already spurred the caravan far ahead. Crack. The long whip sang out. Hiya! The drivers yelled themselves hoarse, the 4 horses pulling each cart running for their lives. Unfortunately, the heavy cargo on the flatbeds acted like dead weight, severely limiting their speed. The pursuers drew closer and closer. Quick, outflank them from both sides, don't let them escape. Modun had just finished assembling his men when he heard the caravan had already passed his encampment. He nearly exploded with rage on the spot and immediately led the chase himself, tearing after them like a mad dog. Swish, swish, swish. The cavalry at the front spurred their mounts relentlessly and finally came within bow range. The first volley of arrows flew, sparse and scattered. Unfortunately, shooting at moving targets from behind offered pitiful accuracy. Most arrows missed entirely. Only a few landed with soft thuds in the gunny sacks at the rear of the caravan. Still, the sight terrified many of the drivers. Captain Yu, the carts are too heavy. The enemy's nearly on our asses. What do we do? Someone yelled hoarsely. You Zhi, riding point on a swift horse, heard the shouts from behind, slowed slightly and glanced back. Damn. The steppe cavalry were only a few dozen paces behind the carts now. Some were drawing bows, others swinging, their arms wide to hurl stones that thudded against the sacks on the carts. He immediately roared back at the drivers. All carts, execute the plan. Jettison the sacks to lighten the load. The drivers had been desperately waiting for that command. The enemy was closing in. If they didn't shed weight soon, they'd truly be caught and surrounded. But You Zhi wasn't concerned about losing a few sacks of salt. He had deliberately waited until they were this close. This was the perfect range for a surprise. Sure enough, as soon as the order was given, the drivers acted. One driver, seemingly glued to his seat, kept a death grip on the reins with one hand, while twisting sharply with the other, shoving one of the sacks piled high behind him off the cart with a grunt. Thump. The heavy sack hit the grassy ground, startling the pursuing Modun cavalrymen who were hot on their heels. What was this? Had the Han tribe given up? Were they throwing down salt in surrender? Or did they foolishly think a few sacks of salt would make them stop to loot? How naive. Couldn't they just pick it up after the battle? But the next second, something happened that made their eyes nearly pop out of their heads. The sack that had just fallen was still connected. A thick hemp rope was tied around the middle of the sack, and its other end was firmly secured to the cart. The cavalrymen followed the rope with their eyes and nearly had their souls scared out of them. As the sack dragged along the ground by the rope, the cart ahead suddenly executed a slick maneuver, veering diagonally to the left. After covering a few dozen meters, thump, another sack fell off the cart. Now they understood. The other end of the first rope was tied to this newly fallen sack. 2 heavy sacks, linked by a taut hemp rope, now stretched like a treacherous tripwire across their path of advance. The cavalrymen at the very front stared wide-eyed. They didn't even have time to curse before instinctively clamping their legs, hard against their horses' bellies trying to make them jump. Some succeeded, but other unlucky souls were thrown clear off, not tripped by the rope, but flung off by inertia during the horse's leap because they lost their grip. It's worth noting that while Modun had acquired some bronze stirrups from the Shin tribe, they were precious items reserved for only a few hundred core cavalrymen. Most rode bareback. The riders at the front had been drawing their bows just moments before, both hands occupied, gripping their mounts solely with their legs. Faced with this sudden leap of faith, it would have been a miracle not to be thrown. Those in the first rank, having seen the rope, could react quickly enough to jump. But those charging behind them were in dire straits. Their view was blocked. They hadn't seen the deadly rope on the ground at all. Thump, thump. Instantly, a dozen riders were tripped, men and horses tumbling, causing chaos in the dense cavalry formation. Those behind couldn't swerve in time and crashed straight into their fallen comrades and horses, triggering a tragic chain reaction pileup. The unlucky ones who were thrown off first were instantly trampled into paste by the hooves of the riders coming up behind. Modun wasn't riding at the very front, and luckily avoided the immediate disaster. Seeing the carnage ahead, he bellowed, in fury, ordering his men to detour around the mess. He stared at the tangled sacks and ropes on the ground, his eyes practically shooting fire. Those Han bastards were too damn cunning, using white salt as a trap. But he didn't stop to inspect. He only cared about continuing the chase. He knew perfectly well this was exactly what the Han tribe wanted, to make them stop. Did they think a few sacks of salt would make them give up the pursuit? Dream on. Meanwhile, You Zhi and his men, fleeing for their lives up ahead, heard the screams and sounds of chaos from behind, and couldn't help but burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. They're falling. Trip and die, you sons of bitches. Still want to rob our Han tribe? In your dreams, and Captain, you're brilliant. This trick really worked. At first I didn't think it would. Cut the chatter, keep running, don't stop with the sacks, keep throwing. You Zhi looked back at the results of their tactic, grinning from ear to ear. That's right, this seemingly lousy idea of using sacks as tripwires was his brainchild. Initially, nobody was optimistic. They thought the sacks were too flat, meaning the connecting rope would be too close to the ground. Horses could easily jump over it, rendering it useless. But no one had anticipated just how outstandingly effective this simple trick would be when the enemy was pursuing them like mad dogs. Yes, the rope was low and easy to evade, if you could see it. But those behind couldn't, and even if they did, at that breakneck speed, how could they possibly react in time? All it took was one unlucky rider falling victim, and the chain reaction in the dense cavalry ranks was simply catastrophic. The carts ahead continued their frantic snaking maneuvers, throwing down sacks as they went, leaving a trail of deadly tripwires behind them. The enemies pursuing closest had learned their lesson this time. They gripped their horses' manes or necks tightly, leaping over the ropes like acrobats. While this prevented them from falling, it also meant they couldn't free their hands to shoot, significantly reducing the pressure on the Han caravan. But the cavalry further back weren't so fortunate. They knew about the Han trick now, but the tripwires on the ground were becoming more numerous and denser. Despite dodging left and right, leaping and swerving with all their might, there were always some unlucky ones who, man and horse together, were tripped up, instantly sparking fresh chaos. Those lucky enough not to be killed in the fall might then be trampled like carpets by their comrades charging from behind. The slightly luckier ones might just be tripped by horses, already on the ground, sending their own mounts stumbling and tumbling head over heels. Modun, chasing behind, was both anxious and furious. He watched his elite warriors bite the dust one after another, having suffered heavy losses without even touching a hair on the enemy's head. He began to wonder, could it be that the Han tribe really didn't care about the white salt? Were they truly willing to throw it all away like this? The more he thought, the more something felt wrong. He quickly spurred his horse away from the main group, circling around the flank to get a better view ahead. He saw that the sacks on the Han caravans, flatbeds were dwindling. Some carts were already completely empty. The unburdened carts were now running incredibly fast, while his own side was still dealing with fallen men and horses, casualties mounting. Seeing this, the truth suddenly hit him. He roared at his men, his voice hoarse. "Stop! Halt, damn it!" Cease the pursuit! Warriors nearby heard the command and began slowing down, passing the order along. Soon, the entire pursuing force gradually came to a halt. Once all the cavalry had reined in their horses, Modun peered into the distance. He could see the Han caravan already far away, all their flatbeds now bare platforms. Not a single sack of salt left on them. Damn it. He had come to steal salt, and they had thrown it all away. What the hell was the point of chasing now? Up ahead, the fleeing Han tribesmen saw the enemy halt. Someone immediately shouted excitedly, "Captain, Modun's men have stopped. They're not chasing anymore." You Zhi didn't even turn his head, just yelled at the top of his lungs, "Ignore them. Keep running. Use this chance to switch horses quickly. They'll be after us again any minute." This time, You Zhi's strategy had completely won over everyone in the caravan. Hearing his command, they scrambled without a word to change to their spare horses, not a single person questioning him. Meanwhile, Modun's men behind them had come to a complete stop. Many dismounted and started trying to haul away the sacks of white salt discarded by the Han tribe, eager to collect these. Spoils of war. Modun was no exception. He urged his panting mount closer to one of the fallen sacks of white salt, leaned over from the saddle, and reached down to grab it. Heave. It didn't budge. In fact, he nearly pulled himself off his horse. Damn it. How is this salt so heavy? Modun cursed, dismounting. He pulled the bronze dagger from his waist and stabbed it into the sack. Pfft. The feel was wrong. It was like hitting stone. When he wrenched the dagger out with some effort and looked, he almost spat blood. The sack, which should have been filled with gleaming white salt, was stuffed completely full of yellow dirt. "Chief, we've been tricked. The sacks are full of dirt." Just then, others who had gone to move the sacks also realized something was wrong. These salt sacks were ridiculously heavy. When they slashed them open and saw the yellowish dirt inside, they finally realized they'd been played by those Han bastards. Fuck them. The Han tribe is too treacherous. Keep chasing. Kill them all. Modun was fuming, smoke practically pouring from his ears, raising his fist to order the pursuit renewed. "Wait, Chief, we can't chase anymore." A trusted subordinate beside him hurriedly intervened. Modun whirled around, glaring fiercely, making the man shiver in fear. The subordinate quickly explained, "Chief, think about it. Since these carts were loaded with dirt and they deliberately took this route to deceive us, where is their real white salt? I suspect either they have another team taking a different route or the salt is still back at the coast and hasn't even been shipped out yet. Our goal this time is to seize the salt, not start a full-scale war with the Han tribe. Please, Chief, reconsider carefully." Hearing this, Modun felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over him, and he calmed down. That was right. The urgent priority was to find that damned white salt. His tribal alliance was counting on this shipment to maintain stability and loyalty. That was the primary objective. But letting those liars who had just duped him get away, he really couldn't stomach the humiliation. He couldn't just let himself be made a fool of for nothing, could he? He gritted his teeth and made his decision. Wounded. Return to camp. The rest of you split into 3 teams. One team, continue pursuing those liars ahead. Stay right on their tail, damn it. One team, head to the secret bridge near the bay as fast as possible and see if the salt is still there. Everyone else search every other possible route. You must find that shipment of white salt for me. Go quickly. The fact that Modun wanted to seize the salt was information You Zhi had passed on to you. So, in reality, You Zhi knew about it even earlier than you did and had more ample time to prepare. With so much lead time, he certainly wouldn't have been foolish enough to just wait passively to be robbed. Modun's guess wasn't entirely off the mark. You Zhi was indeed using the caravan as bait to buy time for the real salt transport. Just as Modun's forces split into 3 groups, searching for the salt like headless chickens, a small, unremarkable nomadic tribe happened to pass by one of Modun's detachments. The tribe's young leader, Gisang, sat astride his horse waving a lassoing pole, pretending to herd his livestock, putting on the appearance of an honest herdsman. Only after Modun's cavalry detachment had ridden far off did he let out a sharp sigh of relief. raising a hand to wipe the nervous cold sweat from his forehead. "Saren, they've passed. Do we move now?" Gesang whispered to the man beside him named Saren, his voice still trembling slightly. "Gesang, calm down." Saren, however, kept his composure. "Don't rush, let them get further away. Remember, right now we are just ordinary nomads grazing our herds, understand?" But Gesang still felt uneasy, asking puzzledly, "Saren, didn't you say the Han tribe is very strong, that joining them means we won't be bullied anymore and our people can live well? Why are we still sneaking around like this? Is the Han tribe afraid of Modun too?" Hearing this, Saren laughed outright, full of confidence. "Gesang, are you still unclear about the Han tribe's strength? In this world, no tribe is stronger than the Han. We are avoiding them this time purely because we don't have enough men. Besides," Saren continued, "our Han tribe has few horses, so we don't have many cavalry for now. But our infantry are all elites. Even Modun wouldn't dare provoke them lightly. It's just that most of our warriors can't ride, so they can't chase them down. Otherwise, would Modun even get a chance to strut around like this? Just you watch. His strutting days are numbered. This time, our chief is widely recruiting nomads precisely to deal with this troublemaker Modun properly. When that time comes, with us nomads who can ride serving as warriors, clad in impenetrable iron armor, armed with horn bows and iron arrows, what will Modun amount to? He'll have to obediently give up the best pastures." Gesang nodded repeatedly, his conviction in Saren, this self-proclaimed Han tribe caravan member, growing stronger. He had seen the various carts made by the Han tribe, bought their cloth, white salt, pottery, and iron pots. What made him most envious was the steel saber at Saren's waist, capable of easily chopping off a cow's head. Unfortunately, the Han tribe never sold such deadly weapons externally. Gesang had never been to the Han tribe's territory. All his knowledge came from the caravans. It was a powerful tribe skilled in making all sorts of wonderful things. Daily necessities, production tools, weapons of war, everything was top-notch. They traded these amazing items for vast numbers of cattle and horses from the steppe, and their own people lived exceptionally well, almost like a paradise on earth. This time Saren had approached him, inviting small tribes like his to join, promising them the best pastures, a chance at a good life, and no need to migrate to the mountains to farm. The Han tribe would soon build cities on the steppe too, allowing them to continue herding. The offer was incredibly tempting. Gesang was deeply moved. After considering for several days, he finally made up his mind. Let's do it. Join the Han tribe. However, he hadn't expected to run into trouble on the way to pledge allegiance. Gesang's tribe lived quite far from the Han tribe's new steppe city, squeezed into the coastal area by larger tribes, which actually put them closer to the caravan's encampment. So Saren simply brought them to the caravan camp. As it turned out, Zaren's unintentional move was perfectly timed. You Zhi had just received news that Modun was planning to raid his goods and was worrying about how to transport the salt safely. The arrival of Gesang's tribe was like receiving charcoal in snowy weather, a timely blessing. Unfortunately, Gesang's tribe was too small, numbering less than 1,000 people including women, children, and the elderly. Have them escort the caravan? Facing Modun's army of at least 3,000 or 4,000, this handful of people wouldn't even be a mouthful. It was purely sending them to their deaths. You Zhi pondered for a long time before making a decision. He would personally lead the main caravan force, loaded with sacks of dirt as decoys, to draw Modun's fire. Meanwhile, the 2,000 head of cattle and horses received from the Xin tribe, along with the real white salt, would be entrusted to Gesang and his people to be transported secretly. Cattle and horses were livestock. Entrusting them to Gesang's nomads to drive along mixed with their own herds made them completely inconspicuous. You Zhi felt assured. The large quantity of white salt was loaded directly onto the livestock. The entire group traveled without a single cart, greatly reducing the risk of discovery. Just as planned, Modun's 3 dispatched search parties saw Gasang's group, just ordinary nomads herding livestock, no carts, no Han people, and didn't even bother to search them, simply whistling past. Their chieftain had given strict orders. They had to reach the Han tribe's coastal camp as fast as possible. Perhaps the salt hadn't been shipped out yet, and so, Gasang, responsible for smuggling the white salt, and Sarin, guiding the way, narrowly escaped detection. They pretended to graze their herds until evening, then, under the cover of dusk, quickly loaded the salt sacks onto the pack animals. Relying on a compass and navigating by the stars, they began their journey under the cover of night. Modun's 3 forces were completely lost. One team was still crazily pursuing You Zhi's dirt transport convoy. The other 2 dashed straight for the coastal camp. The remaining team wandered aimlessly along other routes, searching for a non-existent other salt caravan. Modun himself sulked in his temporary ambush camp. This time, he had suffered a huge loss. Just from chasing the caravan the day before, over 200 of his men had been incapacitated by You Zhi's insidious tripwires. While this wasn't crippling for an army of nearly 5,000, Modun felt deeply aggrieved. Damn it, the Han caravan hadn't even lifted a finger, yet they had inflicted such heavy losses on him using only dirty tricks. He couldn't accept it. Tripped horses and warriors were mostly finished. Horses' necks snapped instantly. The men fared no better. The lucky ones broke arms or legs. Even if they recovered, they'd be crippled, unable to ride or shoot again. The unlucky ones died on the spot, some with broken necks like their horses. Others, initially only lightly injured, were trampled into pulp by their own comrades charging, from behind becoming unrecognizable. Modun wanted revenge, but he knew now wasn't the time. Finding the white salt was paramount. What he didn't know was that while he was coveting the Han tribe's salt, you were plotting against his home base. The Tiger Guard had already been sailing for 2 days. To avoid detection, the fleet hadn't dared to sail close to the lakeshore. Fortunately, the Jinwu Guard scouts leading the way knew the precise location of the enemy's main camp. They sailed in the designated direction, estimating their position based on the sailboat's speed. When they judged they were near the location, they had the fleet anchor first, then sent out small boats to scout the shore. On the evening of the 2nd day after setting out, the fleet reached the designated anchorage point. Xuetu immediately dispatched a dozen single-man reconnaissance boats under the cover of darkness to quietly approach the lake shore. They didn't dare get too close or land, merely observing the scale of the encampment from the lake surface, guided by the distant lights. After darkness completely fell, campfires were lit one by one ashore, and livestock were driven back into temporary pens. Not far from the lake, densely packed yurts glowed like lanterns as lights were lit within them one by one. The scouts, hidden in their small boats, carefully counted the yurts to estimate enemy numbers, simultaneously confirming the terrain to ensure they had found the right place. Everything proceeded silently and methodically. Before long, the scouts paddled back to the main ships to report. Each reported their findings, and Xuetu cross-referenced the data, eventually arriving at a relatively reliable conclusion. Based on the terrain and scale, this was indeed Modun's main camp, his tribe's spring and summer pasture. At this time of year, they usually stayed here. The encampment was not far from the lake shore, vast in size, capable of accommodating tens of thousands. A rough estimate put the number of yurts at 6,000 to 7,000, with lights stretching for several miles. However, combining this with intelligence from the Jinwu Guard, the defensive forces here were not as formidable as they appeared. Modun's alliance could muster tens of thousands of warriors, but that was the total number for the entire confederation. His own core tribe consisted of perhaps just over 10,000 households, and they wouldn't all live together. This large camp with 6,000 to 7,000 yurts was merely his largest base. The number of able-bodied warriors he could mobilize from here was likely around 6,000 plus. News had arrived from You Zhi the previous day, stating that the force pursuing them numbered about 5,000 men and over 10,000 horses. Such a large force couldn't possibly have been drawn from a single camp. It must have been assembled from several encampments. Based on this calculation, Modun's largest home base would have had to keep at least half its warriors for defense. Therefore, the potential enemy strength here was likely around 3,000 plus, factoring in a few combat-capable women, or perhaps a higher proportion of warriors left behind. A conservative estimate placed the defensive force here at around 4,000. The Tiger Guard had only brought 2,000 men this time, putting them at a numerical disadvantage. However, the superior quality of Han tribe equipment was sufficient to compensate for the difference in numbers. Moreover, in the army you had formed, archers and crossbowmen made up a high proportion, half. Within these 2,000 men, there were over 1,000 ranged combatants. This advantage was overwhelming. Xuetu was extremely confident about this battle and immediately decided the entire army would rest on the ships and launch a landing assault before dawn. The soldiers could sleep, but Xuetu and the quartermaster, Xuetu, could not. One had to refine tactical details. The other had to manage provisions and supplies, calculating consumption. The scouts, meanwhile, got no rest at all. When the moon reached its zenith, a dozen small boats once again approached the shore under cover of darkness. The scouts used sounding leads to measure the water depth everywhere, searching for a suitable landing spot, where the water was deep enough for landing craft to beach easily, and allow the larger troop transport ships to get as close as possible. They worked for over 2 hours before finding an ideal landing zone, where they quietly placed several sealed wooden barrels painted red and white to serve as buoys. Their methods were quite professional. Just as the eastern horizon showed the first hint of dawn's light, Xuetu ordered all warriors to wake up, eat, and prepare for battle. Breakfast that day was exceptionally hearty. The usual thin congee was replaced with more filling dry rice. The cured sausage, normally rationed to a few slices, was issued generously today, a whole sausage per man. There were also refreshing pickled vegetables to accompany the meal, and the clear fish soup was plentiful enough to drink like water. The warriors had to be well fed and hydrated. Around 4:30 a.m., the warriors took care of personal needs one last time, then began helping each other don their armor and check their weapons and equipment. Considering the possibility of needing to start fires, Xuetu had also prepared a large number of torches and bamboo tubes filled with tung oil, entrusting them to the relatively lightly burdened spearmen and pikemen. Around 5 a.m., the eastern sky gradually brightened, the light growing dim. The nomads in the pasture encampment also began their new day's labor. Most men were not yet up, but women were already entering the livestock pens with large and small pottery jars and wooden buckets, taking advantage of the cool air to milk animals and make cheese. Others carried pottery vessels to the lake to fetch water, preparing for laundry and cooking. Just then, a woman fetching water by the lake suddenly noticed the red and white barrels floating not far from the shore. Against the natural scenery, these two colors were exceptionally jarring, impossible to ignore. "What is that?" One woman fetching water pointed in surprise. "Never seen it before. Looks man-made, see, they all look exactly the same," speculated a woman beside her. "Looks like some kind of wooden container. Only that Han tribe could make something like this, I reckon," guessed another. "A Han tribe container? How did it float all the way here? Who knows? Maybe they sold it to another tribe, and someone accidentally dropped it in the water, and it floated here. But since it washed up here, it's ours now. Wait, I'll go back and get a pole to fish it out." While the group of women chattered, figuring out how to retrieve these unclaimed buoys, strange, enormous dark shapes on the distant water surface blocked the light of the newly half-risen red sun. Someone immediately pointed towards the Yue. Distance, alarmed and bewildered. "Look quickly, what's that over there? Something is blocking the sun." It seems to be getting bigger. Amidst the women's astonished cries and pointing fingers, over 30 enormous sailboats, riding the east wind like a flock of monstrous beasts with wings spread wide, were charging ferociously towards the lake shore. Crowded densely on the ships, decks were soldiers clad in iron armor, wielding sharp weapons. Their gear had already been loaded into smaller boats alongside. The women on the shore watched as the behemoths rapidly grew larger in their vision, terrified out of their wits, letting out piercing screams. Just as the fleet closed to about 100 meters from the shore, the monsters finally stopped. But before the women could breathe a sigh of relief, deafening war drums suddenly erupted from the massive fleet. Dong! 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 Countless red banners snapped sharply, pointing towards the shore. On all the ships, commanders simultaneously drew their weapons and roared their commands at the top of their lungs. All units, board the landing craft. Archers and crossbowmen covering fire. Sword and shield soldiers, spearmen and pikemen, storm. The beach. Form ranks to cover the archers. Full assault. Move, move, move! The war drums thundered, shaking the heavens, and banners snapped fiercely in the wind. Following the hoarse commands of officers at every level, the iron-clad torrent of the Han tribe began to surge towards the shore. To save time, the landing craft had already been lowered into the water, towed behind the sailboats by ropes. Now, for the landing, soldiers only needed to nimbly jump into the small boats, grab their oars, and row towards the shore with all their might. According to the plan, the sword and shield soldiers and spearmen formed the first wave, responsible for securing the beachhead. Over 1,000 archers and crossbowmen remained crouched on the decks of the various ships, aiming their weapons at the shore, ready to unleash covering fire at any moment to help the vanguard establish a foothold. Only when their brothers up front had held the line would they follow. The nomad women by the lakeshore were utterly dumbfounded. Dozens of never-before-seen behemoths had suddenly appeared on the lake surface with the rising eastern sun. Standing atop them were water monsters clad in iron scales. These monsters emitted thunderous roars, the sound of war drums, propelling small boats, landing craft, towards the shore like dumplings tossed into boiling water. Who would dare stay there? No matter how tough steppe women were, the sight of this formation turned their legs to jelly. Terrified, they dropped whatever they were holding and ran back towards the camp. Some were too petrified to move, rooted to the spot. Just as the first wave of landing craft neared the shore, 100 or so crossbow bolts swished from the large ships behind, accurately blanketing the shoreline. The dozen or so women who hadn't fled were instantly struck by multiple bolts, screaming as they collapsed into pools of blood. The deaths of a few women had no impact on the overall situation, but war was war. The archers' and crossbowmen's orders were clear. Before landing, clear the shore of all living things. Whether women, children, cats, or dogs, everything was secondary to ensuring the vanguard landed smoothly. Indeed, this targeted clearance proved effective. With the splash of oars, the first wave of sword and shield soldiers and spearmen finally stormed ashore. Warriors jumped directly into the knee-deep shallow water, swiftly forming ranks and establishing a firm foothold on the lakeshore. The fleeing women's terrified screams served as warnings, coupled with the deafening war drums from the lake. The nomad camp by the shore instantly exploded into chaos, chickens scattering and dogs barking. Many men, bare-chested and barely having pulled on their trousers, scrambled out of their yurts yelling. Some grabbed spears, others slung bows over their backs. Without needing any organization, their first instinct was to rush towards their horse corrals to retrieve their lifelines, their war horses. What happened? What's going on? Many men felt slightly more secure once mounted and began grabbing the frantically fleeing women to ask for information. Water monsters. Lots of water monsters came from the lake over there by the sunrise. They have shiny scales, and they're killing our people with strange bows and arrows. They're coming ashore. One woman shrieked incoherently, panicked and distraught. Water monsters? The men questioning her were completely bewildered. They had lived their whole lives and never heard such nonsense. However, since these damn water monsters had killed women of their tribe, they couldn't ignore it. A group of fully geared men immediately charged towards the lake. Even from a distance, they could hear the rolling thunder of drums from that direction, and their own hearts began to pound. Could it really be water monsters? Otherwise, why would they emerge from the water accompanied by thunder? Just as they hesitated whether to advance, they saw more people running back from the lakeshore, but shouting something different. Help! The Han tribe is attacking from the lake. Everyone grab your weapons and meet the enemy, yelled a woman in her 20s, cupping her hands around her mouth as she ran. A dozen riders passing her immediately reined in their horses and called out to her. What did you say? The Han tribe is attacking. Yes, it's the Han tribe, lots of them, the woman confirmed with a nod. How do you know it's the Han tribe? Someone else pressed. Some of their flags have the character Han written on them. I recognize it. It's the same character as the one on the bottom of my family's pottery bowl, the woman explained. But someone just said they were water monsters. With fish. Scales? That's armor, Han tribe armor. Don't you know what armor is? The woman retorted impatiently. Finally, everyone understood. After all that confusion, the so-called water monsters were just a group of Han tribe soldiers wearing armor. They had heard of armor. Hadn't their own chieftain tried to emulate the Han tribe by forming a unit of heavy cavalry clad in leather armor? And they now had bronze arrowheads capable of piercing leather armor too. So what was there to fear? No matter how tough the armor, they were still just men, right? What was the difference? However, a more cautious person asked further, how many Han soldiers are there? How many horses? How did they get here? Are they all wearing leather armor? What weapons are they carrying? The young woman collected herself and replied, I didn't count carefully, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 all warriors. I didn't see any horses. They all came across the water on some strange things I've never seen before. They aren't wearing leather. Armor. Their armor is shiny, looks like iron. Their weapons are strange long spears and bows and arrows. Based on her description, the dozen riders quickly calculated in their heads. The numbers weren't overwhelming, 2,000 or 3,000 probably. Manageable. As for weapons, spears and bows, similar to their own equipment, someone spoke up. Quickly go call more men, tell them the Han tribe is attacking. Have them bring their weapons immediately. If they're late, there won't be any spoils left too. Share. The woman nodded, said no more, and ran off to shout the news elsewhere. While the able-bodied men from various parts of Modun's tribe were still slowly gathering, some nomads closer to the lake had already arrived. By the time they reached the shore, the Han tribe's first landing wave was entirely ashore. However, these soldiers didn't rush to attack. Under the command of their officers, they quickly formed a semicircular defensive formation with their backs to the lake. Sword and shield soldiers held large shields, taller than half a man, shoulder to shoulder, forming a dense, low wall of steel. Behind this shield wall stood the spearmen. Though standard infantry spearmen were generally called such, their equipment varied slightly. Halberdiers wielded 4-meter iron halberds but carried no shields. The pikemen, primarily responsible for countering cavalry charges, were equipped not only with terrifying 7.5-meter long pikes, but also with half-meter diameter round shields, mainly used for coordinating with the sword and shield. Soldiers. The formation at this moment was exactly this. Above the steel wall formed by the sword and shield soldiers, rows of gleaming, ultra-long pikes slanted upwards, their tips as dense as a forest. Above this forest of pikes, another layer of round shields was added, raising the height of the shield wall even further. Outside the formation, over 1,000 steppe cavalrymen rode their horses in circles like headless flies, somewhat dumbfounded, as they stared at the tortoise-shell formation before them. This was the first time they had encountered such tactics. The enemy fought completely differently. They had no horses at all, just hid themselves tightly behind large wooden boards, making it impossible to even see their figures clearly from the outside. Moreover, this combination felt like a cat trying to catch a hedgehog. Nowhere to bite. Arrows hitting the dense shields were like scratching an itch. Trying to charge through with lances was blocked by the even longer pikes protruding. From behind the shield wall, a reckless charge would likely result in their own immediate death. But just staring wasn't a solution either. The enemy's defensive posture was clearly a delaying tactic, waiting for reinforcements. Many had already noticed more armored soldiers, rowing small boats across the lake carrying strange bows, crossbows. Presumably, those on shore were waiting for these archers and crossbowmen to arrive before launching a general offensive. In just that short time, more nomads arrived, increasing the number of cavalrymen by the lake to over 2,000. A man, who looked like a leader, saw his own side standing idle while the enemy remained motionless, both sides just staring at each other. Annoyed, he rode over and demanded, "What's going on? Why aren't you attacking? Can't you see more of them or—" "Coming? Are you planning to wait until the enemy multiplies?" Someone immediately replied with a grimace. "They have wooden walls, shields. Our arrows can't pierce them. They also have incredibly long spears. We can't charge through on horseback either. We can't let the brothers die needlessly like this, the leader, however, lashed out with his whip, striking the speaker, who cried out in pain. "Are you all stupid sheep? If arrows don't work, can't you use stones or javelins? Quick, drive them back into the water." After saying this, he dispatched several trusted men on swift horses to rush and inform Modun. The Han tribe was surprise attacking the main camp. This was serious. The battlefield by the lake quickly stirred back to life. Urged on by several minor leaders, the Nomads launched their attack. Countless stones and javelins rained down on the Han tribe's shield wall like hail, producing a dull thud-thud-thud. Though the shield wall wobbled slightly, it remained relatively stable. Jiandun was one member of this shield wall. As a sword and shield soldier squad leader, he was currently yelling himself hoarse, ordering his men to hold fast. "Keep your helmets on properly. Heads down. Hide your bodies behind the shields. Protect your arms and legs." All sword and shield soldiers wore lamellar armor. The scales overlapped layer upon layer, not laced together but interlocking, providing excellent coverage. The upper body was well protected, with pauldrons covering shoulders to elbows, vambraces for the forearms, and even the backs of the hands shielded. The armored skirt extended down to the knees. The only potential weak spot was the exposed lower legs, but with the large shields providing cover now, as long as they stayed tucked in, they were mostly safe. The enemy's stone attack was clearly useless. Without catapults, merely throwing egg-sized stones by hand against thick wooden shields only made noise. The Nomads quickly realized this and increased the number of javelins thrown. With a swish, swish, swish of tearing air, countless javelins flew towards the shield wall, instantly causing some minor losses to the Han formation. Most javelins were either blocked by shields or flew over the wall to land harmlessly behind. But a few incredibly lucky short spears managed to slip through gaps between the shields, inflicting minor flesh wounds on the spearmen standing behind. However, because the Han soldiers all wore iron armor, these grazes weren't serious. Wounded soldiers could continue fighting after simple treatment, having little impact. But this only tactic that posed any threat to the Han tribe, the javelin throws, also petered out after 2 volleys. Cavalry could only carry a limited number of javelins. After all, they weren't primary weapons. Carrying 3 per person was already a lot. They simply didn't have that many in stock. Seeing the javelins proving ineffective, while the Han archers and crossbowmen on the water drew ever closer, the minor leaders left behind by Modun to guard the camp grew anxious. They hastily directed men to circle around to the flanks of the formation, looking for weaknesses. Those with bows fired randomly towards the water, trying to prevent the archers and crossbowmen from landing. The volley from over 2,000 men formed a dense rain of arrows. Unfortunately, their bow range was insufficient. Most arrows fell into the water, kicking up splashes, utterly failing to halt the approach of the archers and crossbowmen. One minor leader, armed with bronze javelins, refused to accept this, yelling defiantly as he spurred his horse directly towards the formation. Charging to about 30 meters from the shield wall, he abruptly pulled the reins, wheeling his horse sideways. In that instant of turning, he hurled the bronze javelin in his hand with all his might. The golden spearhead flashed like lightning, swift and fierce. With a dull thud, it struck hard against a large shield. It actually punched a hole straight through the 2.5-inch thick hardwood shield. The spear tip emerged through the shield, striking the shield bearer right on the side of the face. Fortunately, Han helmets had soft armor flaps hanging down to protect the neck on both sides, and the bronze spearhead failed to penetrate the double-layered lamellar armor. but the ferocious impact still shattered 3 of the soldier's side teeth, causing him to spit blood and pass out on the spot. With this unlucky soldier falling, a gap appeared in the previously seamless shield wall. The halberdiers in the rear rank reacted instantly, dragging the wounded man away and trying to right the shield. But this brief few-second window was seized upon by sharp-eyed enemies. A dozen arrows swished towards the gap. The halberdier, stepping in to fill the breach while trying to lift the shield, was caught in concentrated arrow fire. Though most arrows glanced off his armor, one struck him squarely in the lower leg. Fortunately, due to his stance, the arrow hit his shin bone. The hard bone stopped it, and the arrowhead, lodged in the bone, fell out on its own after less than 2 seconds. Although searing pain shot through his shin, this warrior knew the importance of maintaining formation integrity. Gritting his teeth, he held his ground, silently praying, "Hurry up and get here, crossbow brothers. Give us a breather, so we can counterattack soon." As he muttered his prayers, Xuetu, landing alongside the archers and crossbowmen, noticed the situation here. He immediately halted several hundred crossbowmen who had just stepped ashore, ordering them, "Don't advance further. Stay in the boats. Fire a volley at those bastards on the shore. Relieve the pressure on our brothers up front, and cover the others landing."